My name is Emily Harrison. At 35, I've carved out a life balancing being a mother to a vibrant 5-year-old son and working in the business my parents built from scratch. My husband, Daniel, had always been the pillar I leaned on, or so I thought. I still remember the evening that shattered everything. We were at dinner, the clinking of cutlery mingling with our son's laughter. That's when Daniel dropped the bombshell. "You work for your parents who didn't even finish high school? That's embarrassing, Emily," he said, his fork pausing midair. I choked on my water. "What? Why does that matter now?" Daniel shrugged, a look of disdain creeping onto his face. "I just thought you came from a more educated family. It's not a good look, associating with dropouts." I stared at him, my heart pounding. This was the man who'd vowed to love and respect me, the man who'd embraced my parents like his own. Yet here he was, sneering at their life's work. "But they've built a successful company, Daniel. They worked hard for everything we have," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He scoffed. "Hard work? Please. They probably just got lucky. It's not like they had the brains to do something significant." The words stung like a slap. I looked across the table, at our son who was blissfully unaware, munching on his food. How could I explain to him one day that his father looked down on his grandparents? "Daniel, they're my parents. You've known them for years. Why are you saying this now?" My voice was a whisper, laced with disbelief and pain. He leaned back, his eyes cold. "I guess I just never realized how limited their education was. It's not something to be proud of, Emily, and frankly, it reflects poorly on us." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The man sleeping beside me felt like a stranger. His words echoed in my mind, each syllable a sharp jab at my heart. My parents, who'd sacrificed everything to give me a life they never had, were now a source of shame for my husband. The Emily who had fallen in love with Daniel couldn't reconcile with this new reality. I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping. This was just the beginning, the first crack in the facade of our seemingly perfect life. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and cold silences. Daniel's disdain for my family had seeped into every aspect of our lives. I watched as the man I married transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone who found pleasure in belittling others. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Daniel walked in, his face stern. "Emily, we need to talk about your job," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "What about my job, Daniel?" He leaned against the counter, his eyes cold. "I think it's time you considered quitting. Be a full-time housewife. It's not like your job at that rinky-dink company means anything." I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of anger. "My job means a lot to me, Daniel. My parents built that company from nothing. It's important." He laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Important? Please, Emily. It's a small-time operation. You'd be better off focusing on our home." I shook my head, disbelief and anger intertwining. "I won't quit my job, Daniel. It's part of who I am." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Who you are. You're my wife, Emily. Your place is here, with our son, not wasting time at some dead-end job." I stared at him, the man I no longer recognized. "My parents' business isn't dead-end, and I am not just your wife, I am also a daughter and a professional." His laughter echoed in the kitchen. "Professional? That's a good one. You're playing at a job, Emily. Time to grow up and see what's really important." That night, I lay awake, the words and laughter haunting me. It was clear that Daniel's arrogance and contempt knew no bounds. His disregard for my identity, my family, and my aspirations was not just painful, it was suffocating. As the days turned into weeks, the idea of a life without Daniel started to grow in my mind. A life where I didn't have to defend my parents or my choices. A life where my son wouldn't hear his father mock his grandparents. But I knew that leaving Daniel wouldn't be enough. He needed to understand the pain he caused, to feel the sting of his own venom. I needed to stand up for my parents, for myself. The storm was rising, and I was ready to face it head-on. Daniel's promotion at work brought a new wave of arrogance that was unbearable. He strutted around the house like a peacock, his ego inflated to the point of bursting. One Saturday morning, as I was preparing breakfast, he sauntered into the kitchen with a smirk. "Guess who just got a big promotion? This means we're moving up in the world, Emily." I forced a smile, trying to keep the peace. "That's great, Daniel. Congratulations." He poured himself a coffee. his smirk widening. "With this raise, you really don't need to work anymore. You can finally quit that silly job of yours." I stiffened, my spoon clattering against the pan. "We've been over this, Daniel. I'm not quitting my job." He leaned against the counter, his gaze piercing. "You're still on about that? Emily, be reasonable. You won't have to lift a finger. I can provide everything." The condescension in his voice was like a slap. "It's not about the money, Daniel. I work because I love my job. It's part of who I am." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Love your job? That's just sentimental nonsense. You need to start thinking about what's best for our family." I turned off the stove, my hands trembling. "And what if I think working is what's best for me? For our family?" His eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish, Emily. You're not seeing the big picture. It's time you started acting like a proper wife and mother." The words hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about control, about Daniel dictating how I should live my life. I looked at him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "And what if I don't want the life you're offering?" His expression darkened. "Is that a threat, Emily?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's a promise. I won't let you or anyone else dictate my life." The air between us was electric, charged with unspoken threats and shattered illusions. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. The man I married was gone, replaced by a stranger with whom I shared a house but not a life. As he left the room, the silence was deafening. But within me, a plan was forming. A plan to reclaim my life, to show Daniel he couldn't trample over me. The seeds of revenge were sown, watered by every condescending word and every dismissive gesture. It was time for Daniel to learn that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. The following weeks were a tense chess game with Daniel. His arrogance reached new heights, but I was busy laying the groundwork for what was to come. One day, I was called into an unexpected meeting at work. My father looked grave as he introduced me to Mr. Anderson, a project manager from a collaborating firm. "Emily, we have a serious issue," my father began, his voice heavy with concern. "It's about a project your husband is leading." My heart sank. "What about it?" Mr. Anderson cleared his throat, his expression grim. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Daniel has been manipulating the project for his gain." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "He's been diverting resources to another firm, and there are rumors of him being involved with someone from that company," Mr. Anderson said hesitantly. The room spun around me. "An affair?" The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "We can't confirm that," my father interjected, his face etched with worry. "But the evidence against him is quite damning." I sat there, numb. The man I had married, the father of my child, was not only jeopardizing my family's business, but possibly having an affair. Rage bubbled inside me, a burning, seething cauldron of betrayal and hurt. "What do you plan to do?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "We need to gather more evidence," Mr. Anderson said, "but we need to be discreet. If Daniel realizes we're onto him, he might cover his tracks." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "I'll help. He won't suspect me." Over the next few days, I played the dutiful wife, while secretly gathering evidence with Mr. Anderson and my father. Each document I found, every covert conversation I overheard, was another piece in the puzzle of Daniel's deceit. But it wasn't just about the project anymore. I needed to know the truth about the alleged affair. If Daniel could betray my family's business, what else was he capable of? I hired a private investigator, my resolve steeling with every passing day. If Daniel was leading a double life, I would expose him for the fraud he was. The day the investigator handed me the envelope felt surreal. Inside were photos and messages that confirmed my worst fears. Daniel was indeed having an affair. Tears of anger and hurt blurred my vision as I looked at the pictures. But amidst the pain, there was clarity. Daniel had underestimated me for the last time. It was time for his house of cards to come tumbling down. Armed with the truth, my determination to bring Daniel down became unshakable. I met with Mr. Anderson and my father, our meeting charged with a sense of urgency. "We have enough to go public with his misconduct," Mr. Anderson said, his voice grim. "But we need to be strategic about this." I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. "We can't just expose his professional misconduct. We need to reveal his personal betrayal as well. It has to be a complete takedown." My father looked at me, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. "Emily, Are you sure you want to do this? It's going to get ugly. I clenched my jaw, feeling a surge of resolve. He made it personal when he betrayed our family. I'm ready. Over the next few days, we meticulously planned our course of action. Mr. Anderson gathered the necessary evidence from the project, while I compiled the proof of Daniel's affair. The plan was to confront him at his company, where he could not escape the consequences of his actions. The day of reckoning came swiftly. Daniel left for work, unaware that his world was about to crumble. I arrived at his office with Mr. Anderson and my father, our faces set in determination. We confronted him in the conference room, the evidence laid out like a damning mosaic of his deceit. Daniel's face paled as he realized the extent of our knowledge. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" Daniel blustered, trying to regain his composure. "No joke, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "We know everything. The sabotage of the project, the affair. All of it." He scoffed, trying to brush it off. "You have no proof." Mr. Anderson stepped forward, laying out the documents and photos. "We have all the proof we need. Your career is over, Daniel." Daniel's eyes darted around the room, desperation creeping into his expression. "You can't do this to me. I've worked too hard to get here." I looked at him, my heart void of any affection I once had. "You should have thought of that before you betrayed us all." The meeting ended with Daniel being escorted out of the building, his career in tatters. As he passed me, his eyes met mine, a mixture of shock, anger, and defeat in his gaze. I didn't flinch. This was the price of his betrayal, a price he had to pay. As I left the building, the weight of the last few weeks began to lift. Daniel was out of my life, professionally and personally. It was time to rebuild, to focus on my son and my work. But above all, it was time to heal. The aftermath of Daniel's exposure was like a storm that swept through our lives, leaving a trail of revelations and consequences. His professional disgrace was just the beginning. A few days after the confrontation, I received a call from Daniel. His voice, once confident and arrogant, was now laced with desperation. "Emily, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything," he pleaded. I held the phone tightly, my resolve unwavering. "There's nothing to explain, Daniel. I've seen the evidence. It's over. You can't do this to me. You're ruining my life." His voice rose in anger. "You did this to yourself," I replied, the bitter taste of betrayal still fresh. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." He was silent for a moment, then his tone changed, becoming more sinister. "If you think you can get away with this, you're wrong. I won't let you destroy me." The threat hung in the air, but I wasn't intimidated. "I'm not afraid of you, Daniel. You've lost your power over me." I hung up, feeling a sense of empowerment. Daniel's threats were empty, the last gasps of a man who had lost everything. The news of Daniel's affair and professional misconduct spread, and the reactions were immediate. His social circles shunned him, and his professional network crumbled. The man who had prided himself on his image and status was now a pariah, his reputation in tatters. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, as Daniel had little ground to stand on. I was awarded full custody of our son and a significant portion of our shared assets. But it wasn't the financial settlement that gave me satisfaction. It was the knowledge that Daniel's downfall was of his own making. He had underestimated me, thinking he could control and belittle me without consequence. In the end, it was his arrogance that led to his undoing. He had sowed the seeds of his destruction, and I had merely helped them grow. As I closed this painful chapter of my life, I looked forward to a new beginning, a future where I was free from Daniel's shadow, free to be myself and provide a better life for my son. Daniel's fall from grace was a stark reminder of the price of betrayal and arrogance, a price he would continue to pay long after our paths had diverged. The finality of the divorce brought a mixture of relief and reflection. The house, once filled with tension and discord, now resonated with a quiet peace. My son and I adjusted to our new life, one where laughter began to replace the echoes of arguments. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs, my son looked up at me, his eyes curious. "Mom, why don't we see Daddy anymore?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes people change, honey, and sometimes it's better to be apart than together." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and turned his attention back to the photos. In his simple acceptance, I found a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The business thrived as I invested more of myself into it, my parents' legacy becoming a testament to resilience and hard work. The community rallied around us, their support a stark contrast to the isolation that Daniel now faced. Rumors reached me occasionally about Daniel's struggles. His career had stalled, his social circles had evaporated, and the woman he had an affair with had left him. It seemed that the life he had chosen was crumbling around him. I felt a sense of poetic justice in his downfall, but it didn't bring me joy. Instead, it served as a reminder of the cost of deceit and selfishness. My journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught me invaluable lessons. I learned the importance of standing up for myself, the strength in vulnerability, and the power of letting go. As I looked at my son, growing up so quickly, I knew that the most important lesson I could teach him was respect. Respect for others, for himself, and for the choices people make in life. Daniel had become a distant memory, a chapter closed and left behind. My focus was now on the future, on building a life filled with purpose and joy. In the end, the greatest revenge was not in seeing Daniel's destruction, but in my own reconstruction. In rising from the ashes of our broken marriage, I found a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I had emerged from the storm, not unscathed, but undefeated. And in that triumph, I found my peace.